Even though the 2024 season is just getting started, the 2025 driver market looks set to be a banger. Top teams making big moves has already started the domino effect down the grid, along with some great young talents looking closer than ever to earning their spot full time. And after no changes last season, we look set to have the most volatile driver market ever. So what will the 2025 grid end up looking like? Let's go through each of the 10 teams, discuss the prospective drivers for each place, and decide once and for all what we have to look forward to next season. Let's get into it. I had originally planned to make this video just before the start of the season until Lewis Hamilton dropped the Ferrari bomb on the entire Formula 1 grid, so I thought I'd let the dust settle a little bit, and then I made the video again just for Nico Hülkenberg to be announced for Sauber and then Audi. So as soon as this gets edited, there will be another move in the driver market, but there are still a lot of unanswered questions, in particular these drivers here, because there are 12 drivers on the Formula 1 grid that are still out of contract at the end of the season. Although what I find most strange is that we haven't really heard much talk about any of these drivers and whether or not they will get their contracts extended with the teams they're already in, which makes me feel like there is a lot of movement on the horizon. So I'm going to go through all 10 teams on the Formula 1 grid and give you my opinion on who I think will end up forming next season's lineups. However, having built up all of that drama, let's start with the least dramatic team on the Formula 1 grid in McLaren. And it does feel like that's a bit weird to say as a McLaren fan. The Papaya team have got themselves 2 drivers signed, sealed and delivered for another few seasons. And you can't really blame them. As driver lineups go, it's one of the youngest driver pairings on the Formula 1 grid. But Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri are both exceptional talents and are just going to get better and better over the next few seasons. From the team's point of view, you can't really ask for a much better pairing than these two moving forwards, especially if the team continue their upwards trajectory, having 2 drivers that are going to be coming towards the peak of their powers as we go through the next cycle of car from 2026 onwards. As a McLaren fan, I am beyond excited to see what they can do. Although I kind of wish I was a Ferrari fan because I'm also very excited to see what Ferrari can do. They've been moving in the right direction this year and have been the closest competitor to Red Bull in this era of car since 2022. So you would think adding a 7-time world champion to the team would only make things better. And we'll get to that in a second because we all know that they knocked down the first domino in this year's driver market. But before they did that, they went about confirming Charles Leclerc for the foreseeable future. And I think we all knew it was going to happen considering his relationship with the Ferrari team, but getting it down on paper, in my opinion, is an exceptional piece of business from Ferrari. However, they are getting rid of their most recent race winner, Carlos Sainz, with the Spaniard being out of contract at the end of the 2025 season. We know that he's going to be leaving the Scuderia, and he's kind of taken it personally, putting in possibly his best season in Formula 1 so far. So you'll be happy to hear I do have a place on the Formula 1 grid for Carlos Sainz later on in the video because he definitely deserves one. He's most certainly not being dropped due to performance issues. Overall, he's been an exceptional driver for the Ferrari team whilst he's been there, and he's worked really well with Charles Leclerc, often matching the Monegasque in terms of performance. However, despite being a great driver, he is being replaced by a 7-time world champion in Lewis Hamilton, and unfortunately for Carlos, when Lewis comes knocking at the door, somebody was going to have to make way. And clearly, Lewis Hamilton believes that the Ferrari setup moving forwards is the right place to offer him the best opportunity at that record-breaking 8th world championship win. And I'll be honest, the season before a regulation change is usually a pretty good one. So in 2025, if Ferrari can close the performance gap with Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc possibly battling Max Verstappen for a championship, I wouldn't mind watching that. I'm also going to sort out Aston Martin early in all of this because technically they have a seat going, but realistically they don't. Starting off on the Spanish side of the garage, Aston Martin would have been absolutely desperate to keep hold of Fernando Alonso, and I think the team would have done just about enough to convince him that they're still moving forwards with this project. They've been able to deliver him podiums once before. Maybe they can deliver him podiums and a possible chance at a victory again. And I know in classic Fernando Alonso fashion, he was quite coy and a little bit playful when it comes to stirring the pot and rumours around his future. Don't get me wrong, Fernando Alonso loves a move to a new team. We've seen that way more than we probably should have in his career. And I wouldn't put it past him to drop a bomb during the summer break. But for me, if you look at the options, I just don't think Red Bull is actually a viable choice for Fernando Alonso, as much as a lot of people would have loved to see it. And then there's the links to the Mercedes team that were being thrown around. But at this moment in time, is the Mercedes car that much more competitive than Aston Martin? And in the grand scheme of things, with Fernando Alonso wanting to win races before he retires, I don't think the Mercedes team is that much of a step up. And in fact, if Aston Martin get it right with Honda and Aramco, they could actually be ahead of the Mercedes team in 2026 fairly comfortably. And then when it comes to Lance Stroll, as with a lot of fans, I'd love to see somebody else given an opportunity in that second Aston Martin seat alongside Fernando Alonso. There are so many fun options, from Carlos Sainz to Yuki Tsunoda, but I just can't see it happening. Like, Mike Crack has even come out recently and discussed, well, what everybody knew, but he actually said it, in that the Aston Martin team as we know it only exists because Lawrence wanted to get Lance his own team on the grid, which means that I think Lance Stroll stays in the team for at least another couple of years. And then if Aston Martin are properly competitive in the next cycle and would be battling for championships, were it not for Lance Stroll throwing away points, then we might finally see the team force Lance out. But for now, I think Aston Martin will announce the same driver lineup for 2025 as they currently have in 2024. Now we get into teams where there could or could not be changes on the horizon. And I think the next team that will confirm their 2025 driver lineup might be Red Bull, because everyone's going to be waiting to see if they can get into this seat. And let's get the obvious out of the way. I know there have been a few rumors that maybe he'll leave, but for me, Max Verstappen is absolutely guaranteed to be in a Red Bull seat next season. Not only because he's already got a contract, but because he's also looking likely to be a 4-time world champion going into the 2025 season. 4 championships that he's won back to back to back to back with Red Bull. So he's locked in. Then there's the question mark over Sergio Perez. And at the end of the 2023 season, it looked like the Mexican was absolutely guaranteed to be kicked out of the Austrian team at the end of his contract. But he started the 2024 season well and looks likely to be part of another Constructors' Championship, so he might be able to do just enough to convince Red Bull that he deserves to stay on, even if it is just for one more year. Then, of course, there's the consideration for Daniel Ricciardo in all of this. The Australian rejoined the Formula One grid in Hungary halfway through the 2023 season and made it very clear that the only reason he was going to then AlphaTauri, now RB, was so that he had the opportunity at getting back alongside Max Verstappen in the main team. But since his return, I don't think he's been able to really show that he's deserving of that Red Bull seat and would be able to do anything better than Sergio Perez is able to do in a seat alongside Max Verstappen. In fact, I went into it in a lot more detail in this video up here if you're interested, in why I think this season hasn't gone quite right for Daniel Ricciardo so far and why he's just not clicking with the RB despite a slightly better performance in the updated RB recently. But back to the point, I therefore don't think Daniel Ricciardo is going to be displacing Sergio Perez and therefore getting the seat alongside Max Verstappen. Instead, I think Sergio Perez will be displaced by a different ex-Red Bull Junior driver, because I think Carlos Sainz is the best choice for the team. And I know that there have been discussions from the Red Bull team saying they can't match the other offers that he's had, but from Red Bull's perspective, you're getting the best possible second driver to Max Verstappen from all of the available drivers on the grid, in my opinion, whilst bringing back a driver that you weren't very happy to see go from Toro Rosso back in the day. And from Carlos Sainz's perspective, even though he's being dropped by Ferrari, he manages to move to a team higher up in the pecking order right now so that he can continue to fight for wins, finally getting into the Red Bull team, which was something that he missed out on before despite driving incredibly well for the sister team. So for me, Sergio Perez is dropped by Red Bull. They pick up the driver that is undoubtedly an upgrade, whilst also still being a seamless fit with the team in Carlos Sainz. So with Red Bull picking up Carlos Sainz, what does that mean for the sister team in RB? Obviously, Daniel Ricciardo is going to miss out on his dream of going in alongside Max Verstappen at the main Red Bull team once again, whilst Yuki Tsunoda has been further developing his racecraft and looks like one of the best drivers towards the back of the pack so far in 2024. With that seat in the main Red Bull team unavailable to either of them, in my opinion, with both of them out of contract, I do think we're about to see some changes, especially in the form of Liam Lawson. After coming in for Daniel Ricciardo for 5 races during the 2023 season, he went from a driver that looked destined to just miss out on a place on the Formula One grid into showing that he is more than deserving of a Formula One seat, because he was excellent, particularly in Singapore, where he was the only Red Bull powered car to reach Q3. And I feel like he was probably given some form of guarantee when it comes to a 2025 seat from Red Bull. Otherwise, he could have probably found himself a seat elsewhere on the grid at the end of last season, which means it comes down to which of Yuki Tsunoda or Daniel Ricciardo gets replaced. And I personally think it's more likely that Yuki Tsunoda gets the nod and stays with the team for 2025. The start of this season has seen Yuki step up his performances once again, and although he looks unlikely to move on yet and looks unlikely to get a seat at the top Red Bull team anytime soon, I do think he's shown that he deserves to keep his place on the Formula One grid. And I think RB will be happy to keep him around a little while longer because he is finally filling that space that Gasly left within the team a couple of years ago. With Liam Lawson alongside him, that means RB looks to have a young and improving driver lineup that will get enough out of the car, in my opinion, to make sure it finishes where it should. Moving on to Mercedes, and we have of course mentioned before that Lewis Hamilton is leaving to Ferrari, but George Russell will be sticking around a little while longer. And I think it's fair to say that George Russell's time at Mercedes so far has been mixed. I mean, he was really consistent during his first season. He delivered them a lot of points and even a win during a horrible season for the team. But last year, it did feel like he made quite a few high-profile errors, not only colliding with other drivers, including his teammate, but also collisions with the wall in Canada and most notably Singapore, where he only had himself to blame. However, having said that, we're not here to talk about George Russell. He is here to stay, and whether or not he steps up to fill the void left by Lewis Hamilton is yet to be seen. Because if it isn't George Russell, it could end up being Kimi Antonelli, who I think is almost certainly going to be driving for the Mercedes team in 2025. The fact that Mercedes are willing to miss out on candidates with really strong track records like Carlos Sainz and Fernando Alonso, or even outside the box candidates like Ocon or Albon, who they could likely sign up right now if they really committed to it, just makes me feel like they're waiting for Kimi. And Antonelli has already been out on track in his first Formula One test program this season at the Red Bull Ring, with 2 days of running in the 2021 Constructors' Championship winning Mercedes W12. And then extra dates have been added to his program later on in the year, now that the team know Lewis Hamilton is leaving. To me, that's a huge clue as to the team's plans for his future, and considering a championship battle in 2025 looks so far away from happening, they might as well take this opportunity to get him in early and get him settled within the team, something which George Russell missed out on when Mercedes were winning constantly. Audi's influence on the Sauber team they'll be taking over in 2026 is starting to be seen in the driver market, with both Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu out of contract at the end of the 2024 season. They were already racing for their futures, with the team dramatically changing behind the scenes. However, we already know that Nico Hülkenberg has become Audi's first driver signing for its upcoming Works Formula One team in 2026. The German will rejoin Sauber for the 2025 season on a multi-year contract to help prepare the team for its transformation. And I personally think picking up one of the standout midfield drivers like Nico Hülkenberg, who is experienced and dependable, to kind of build from and eventually transition into a second driver is a great step in the right direction for the team. Is he necessarily an upgrade on Valtteri Bottas? That's to be debated, but the Audi team had their eyes on Nico Hülkenberg for a while now, and they've really wanted to bring in a German driver into one of their seats. Then looking at the current Sauber pair and their time together, for me, there isn't too much to separate them. I talked about it a little bit more in this video here, but I think Valtteri Bottas just edges it slightly in my opinion due to his experience, but realistically, Audi want to change both drivers and get in Carlos Sainz alongside Nico Hülkenberg if they can. However, as you've seen before, I think that Carlos Sainz ends up at Red Bull because the Sauber car just is nowhere near good enough at the moment to bring in a driver of Carlos Sainz's caliber. So instead, I've gone for Sauber picking up Esteban Ocon as a dependable midfield driver that can come in and be good enough straight off the bat, whilst the team is still in that transitional phase. And I think that Esteban Ocon is seeing the Alpine team falling apart from the inside around him, and he's been at the team long enough to see that it's probably not going to get any better anytime soon. So he could be looking to exit the French team because he's out of contract at the end of the season too. And of the options available, I think he would back himself to battle alongside Nico Hülkenberg and try and get the better of the Germans so that Audi keep him around as their project develops. Also because he's that little bit younger, meaning that Hülkenberg probably gets replaced by the big name signing in a few seasons' time if it's going well for Audi, and Ocon becomes the solid number 2. Which has made looking at Haas for the 2025 season a little bit more complicated now that we know Nico Hülkenberg is definitely moving to Sauber for next year. Because since coming back onto the full-time Formula One grid with Haas in 2023, he's often stood out amongst those back-of-the-pack drivers, getting much more from this Haas package than Kevin Magnussen in their time as teammates. And in a way, it's a real shame for Haas because by outperforming his teammates so well and securing points finishes this season, Nico has made himself one of the more sought-after free agents for the 2025 season. And I think if you asked Haas at the beginning of the season, like if you told them they had to get rid of one of these drivers, they probably would have opted to get rid of Haas veteran Kevin Magnussen. but they now know that Nico Hülkenberg is definitely leaving. So how do they sort out this awkward situation they found themselves in? Well, first and foremost, it's not a huge secret that Haas were already considering Ferrari's Ollie Behrman for a seat in 2025. He's already been out in the Haas car with the team last season, where he gained a lot of praise from Haas, and that earned him the reserve driver role with them this season, and he was set to be in the Haas car multiple times again this year too, and that was planned before he had that incredible debut with Ferrari in Saudi Arabia, where he showed that he has an insane amount of potential. And this seems like a deal that's pretty much already done, but yet to be announced, because Haas would be pretty insane not to get Behrman in, and I can't see him turning down a Formula One seat, even if it is just with Haas, especially because Haas actually look much better this year than we've expected. Then for the second driver seat, it would be easy to say that Kevin Magnussen will probably stick around for the time being, but Kevin Magnussen has been pretty underwhelming in comparison to Nico Hülkenberg over their time as teammates, so Haas might still decide to move him on, which is why I think Zhou Guanyu, despite being dropped by Sauber, could find himself sticking around on the Formula One grid and taking a Haas seat for 2025. Let's not forget that the real reason Zhou Guanyu got onto the Formula One grid in the first place was due to his financial backing and the money that he brings in. And how many times have we seen Haas struggling financially? Zhou Guanyu solves that issue for them. Plus, I think that Zhou has proven himself to be a good enough driver. Like, it's not a Mazepin situation. Zhou is known for his great work ethic off track, and I think he would still put in good performances and occasionally pick up points whilst keeping the car on the circuit and helping the team improve. Williams have a really awkward dynamic at the moment with Alex Albon and Logan Sargeant, because both drivers are out of contract at the end of this season, but also both drivers are in very different positions within the team's thinking. Williams will be absolutely desperate to keep hold of Alex Albon. Since his introduction into the team, he has been a breath of fresh air and has been right at the forefront of their improvement during this regulation cycle. Drives like Canada last season from Alex stand out amongst the back of the pack and have put Alex in a position where he's even being linked to drives with top teams. So even though Williams really want to keep hold of him, he'll probably wait and see what happens elsewhere. Whereas Logan Sargeant is the exact opposite, and let's be honest, Williams know that they need to replace Logan Sargeant, and probably would have replaced him last year had there been some better options available. And because of that polarizing nature of their driver lineup, as well as their position on the grid, I think they'll have to wait until everybody else has made their decisions before they can confirm their driver lineup. I do think they'll be able to hold on to Albon and convince him to stay with the team at least for now, because as you've seen, I just don't think there's a space for him higher up on the grid yet. Then in terms of replacing Logan Sargeant, I could see Williams opting for an older head that will hopefully help with the money that they've lost through crashes over the last 2 seasons, a little bit like when Haas brought in Hülkenberg, and had Nico not already been confirmed for Sauber, I think he would have actually been a really good choice for Williams too. However, once the dust settles, I think that Williams will have their choice of Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez. Of course, Valtteri Bottas has been with the team before he moved to Mercedes. He brings a lot of experience and would be a good driver to help James Vowles with the behind the scenes work that he's doing, because they both worked together at Mercedes for so long, winning championship after championship. I've maybe counterintuitively gone for Sergio Perez. I think he brings in that American market and the money in a similar way to Logan Sargeant, which will be a huge boost for Williams. They need that additional injection of money to get the infrastructure changes that they want to make before 2026. Whilst from the driving side, he already has a really good relationship with Alex after their time together at Red Bull. So I just think that dynamic would get more out of that Williams car. Last but not least, we have Alpine, and I've left them until the end because they find themselves in a tough situation. I've mentioned before that I think Esteban Ocon finds himself signing for Sauber. His time at Alpine just seems to have run its course for me, whilst Pierre Gasly is also out of contract at the end of the season. However, I don't think he gets offered a spot anywhere else on the grid, and he has such a huge French fan base that Alpine and Renault will really want to keep hold of him. I think it's underrepresented how much Gasly brings to this French team in terms of social impact and collaborations they've been able to make work, especially considering he replaced their own world champion. So I don't think Gasly goes anywhere, but replacing Esteban Ocon is going to be a really difficult task considering how badly this team has fallen during this regulation cycle. Remember, they finished 4th in 2022, and the disruption within the team and the dominoes of key personnel that just keep falling with no stop in sight makes it really difficult to predict Alpine's trajectory. Where it matters on track, they're starting to become a bit of a poison chalice. Everyone that goes there, no matter the success of their past, gets moved on within a few years and branded a failure by the higher-ups. So despite the Renault name in the background, I'm not sure many drivers will be that excited by the prospect of filling that available seat. So I think they'll have to go for one of their drivers that is currently part of their academy program, and I think they'll opt for Victor Martins. I know that last year, both of the team's practice sessions went to Jack Doohan, and he is sort of the full-time reserve driver now, but Martins has 2 single-seater titles, he was Formula 2's best qualifier in his rookie season last year, and he only finished 18 points behind Doohan in last year's Formula 2 standings. He just has raw pace, in my opinion, something that can't really be taught. He just kind of knows how to make a car quick and finds the absolute limit of a car's performance. He is that little bit older than Doohan, but he is French, which unfortunately Doohan isn't, and if Martins can turn around his poor start to this year's Formula 2 season, I can see him just beating Doohan to this spot. Which means overall we find ourselves with a 2025 grid where Red Bull have Verstappen and Sainz, Mercedes have Antonelli and Russell, Aston Martin have Stroll and Alonso, Ferrari have Leclerc and Hamilton, McLaren have Norris and Piastri, Alpine have Gasly and Martins, Williams have Albon and Perez, Haas have Behrman and Zhou, Sauber have Hülkenberg and Ocon, and RB have Tsunoda and Lawson. Although by the time this video comes out, because I am cursed, undoubtedly that will have changed. Although if you do want to know a little bit more about Nico Hülkenberg moving to Audi, I made this video up here. So click that link and I'll see you over there.